Hello and welcome to Expert Insights, powered by Parker Hannifin, the global leader in motion and control technologies. My name is Mark Jeffries, and today we're looking at the route to carbon zero. We're going to find out what that means and explore the opportunities that the latest technology is allowing us all to harness. I'm delighted to welcome two Parker experts in all things hydrogen and electrification and more. We have Applications and Product Development Manager Robert Airey and Application Engineer Gerhard Raml. Welcome to both of you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Great to see you. Let's start with you, Gerhard. Tell us a bit about your background and what interests you.
My background is electrical and mechanical engineering. And I'm very interested is really this bringing machines to life which are operating on a very efficient way. And this is the main thing where I'm in this position, which I'm not.
Efficiency is your passion, I believe.
Yes, efficiency and yes, electrification. This story is my passion, let's say.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you for being with us. And Robert, same question to you. Give us a little bit of background.
Yeah, predominantly my background's around fluid connectivity and gas connectivity. So varying systems getting together and the technologies that transfer media or power. But in terms of interest, we often like to know how things work, why they came about in industry and history. But where we are now, things are moving and evolving, and it's being involved in how it's going to work in the future and what technology is therefore needed in the future. And being involved in that is very exciting.
Well, Robert, thank you as well. I'll stay with you, Robert. Let's just talk about the trends and drivers involved in going carbon zero. I mean, for a start, there's so much political, cultural, social pressure, but there are so many business cases as well. What do you see as the essential trends and drivers?
Similar to what you've mentioned, Mark, there is a lot of media around government statements and targets that's driving industry, companies. And while there are these going carbon zero, going green targets that are being established, that's basically, I wouldn't say the end goal, it's the start. We're looking at the places we live, the environment, the country, and a sustainable future for ourselves, our children, and generations to come. So that's really the driver, is keeping everyone on the planet green and healthy.
And Gerhard, how far would you agree? Because although those are very socially aware targets, there is also a financial consideration when it comes to the efficiency that could be produced.
Yeah, I completely agree, and the financial story is one aspect to it too. But it's more the global financial story. It's not of one single component. So we have a lot of activities around the world. So we have the C40 cities, where it should be renamed to something like C100 because it's already like 100 cities, something like that. They are in an organization to reduce the whole energy consumption and becoming carbon neutral. And we have some governmental activities in the Nordic countries of Europe with Sweden and Norway, where they have decided to become a complete fleet with transportation, railway, which includes railway, also to become more carbon neutral. It's going on, and we have all these legislations because the target is really to reduce the greenhouse gas emission, to reduce, as we know from the Paris Agreement, to reduce the heating of our world.
So Robert, let me bounce it back to you. Let's talk about the benefits of going carbon zero, because there are still some organizations that are, well, you know, it's fine, let others make that effort and we'll carry on doing what we do. Aside from the environmental advantages, are there any other benefits that you could detail for us?
I think that's an interesting question because it involves everyone, we would say, rather than large corporations or countries and big organizations. But individually, we could take it down to a personal level of conscience, feeling like we are contributing, we're a part of something bigger.
Yeah.
And these technology transfers, electrification or hydrogen, allows us as an individual level to contribute to that, to feel like we are contributing to the environment and to the future. I think these technologies that evolve, the more people adopt them, it'll drive further technologies in the future. So the more people are involved and adopt them now, it creates consumer confidence. It drives investment, it drives jobs, companies, economies. So there's a vested interest, I think, for anyone, no matter what position they may be in terms of looking at going carbon zero. It has a benefit for each individual as well.
Well, you make a good argument, but you mentioned two essential pieces there, electrification or hydrogen. If it's a choice, which is the better option? I'll stay with you, Robert.
Now, that's a question that divides opinion. It's a very, very good question. And I think the answer depends on when you're asked, perhaps where you live, and what you know. So you'll often hear an argument for either side, and often the argument or preference boils down to perhaps what Gerhard's mentioned: transportation, cars, the things as we as individuals are touching and involved in. It's our habits, it's what we know. But realistically, if we think of the bigger issues that's been mentioned, the environment, the places we live, our future, that you would think, well, perhaps there's an argument for both. We're trying to reduce carbon emissions, go green, sustainability, and so on. So between the two, it's a very hard choice, and it will come down to where we are in the stream of time in terms of development, infrastructure, and what we think we're going to be using it for. So vehicles is often the natural discussion. You could go electrification or hydrogen. If I was asked right now today for that application, probably electrification is the established route, but long term, probably hydrogen. It has the bigger aspects of infrastructure in a large industry, universities, communities can be powered, offshore can be powered with hydrogen. It has that capability, but the infrastructure is still developing, and that's what people are still trying to work out. What will the future look like?
Right. You make a very good point, because there's been so much journey towards electrification, and I guess relatively speaking, less on the hydrogen side. But I want to bring Gerhard in. Do you agree with what Robert was saying? Electrification now, hydrogen in the future, or maybe a different view?
Let's say, as Robert mentioned, electrification is, I will make a step back. So the question is, what is the power source which we are using? Is it fuel cell, which is hydrogen, or is it batteries? Because in the past we had the diesel engine tank. So it's more or less the question of which power source are we using, because both are ending up using electrical components.
Yeah.
So this is the main story where we should start our thinking. So, and therefore we say, okay, because the batteries are now, it's led by the car manufacturers. They are more popular. Everyone, when it comes to electrification, everyone is automatically thinking on batteries and rarely thinking it could be fuel cell. But we see a lot of examples already existing with fuel cells too. And there is also a question of the usage, as Robert mentioned, on trucks where they have to go, I don't know, 1,000 miles. In future, it will be a fuel cell, but it might be a combination from fuel cell and electrification on batteries because of peak shaving issues. So peak power is covered in addition, and so you can keep the system in a very good, efficient way on both sides.
Very interesting. And Gerhard, let me just stick with you for one tiny bit extra. So this is now my ignorant question, because I am not an expert like you guys are. But I have a Tesla sitting outside. I love it. It's a very fun car. I love plugging it in and charging it with electricity and thinking I'm doing something for the planet. But that electricity has been produced via a method that probably still produces CO2. How much further down the line do we need to think when it comes to the electrification of things like vehicles?
The main thing is we have to make the whole chain of producing the power source and using the power source in a very efficient way. So we need to increase the complete efficiency. And we have to compare it to what a diesel engine is on efficiency, from bringing it out of the soil and finally use it on a car or on a truck or wherever. So yeah, it's not a good idea to charge your electric powered car with a diesel generator.
Right, that would be crazy.
Yeah, so it's really like we have to increase the complete efficiency of using all these natural resources which we have.
So, Robert, what would you add to this discussion? And then I'd like to ask you to lead into what would be my next question, which is, what can we learn from the early adopters of these technologies?
Yeah, what Gerhard mentions is a good point. Batteries are established. There's often an argument as to the carbon footprint and perhaps producing those. But that comes down to the understanding of a battery. But what goes in behind that, the investment of companies, the sponsorships the governments are giving into these technologies, that is a concern for these companies to reduce how they manufacture these, the materials, the recyclability of these products and materials. Can it be 100% recyclable? This all forms part of the larger discussion. So today, hydrogen, some of its production, or majority of its production, does leave some form of carbon footprint. The going future state, this is what's often in the press about green hydrogen, it's sustainable energy, it's using water, electrolysis. So its footprint is green. So you're using clean energy to produce hydrogen. So that has a very strong adoption, but it's often referred to in the production of it and large scale use. In terms of adopting it, it's the infrastructure. If you're talking cars with electrics, it's quite easy to recharge your vehicle today. But in the UK, for instance, refueling hydrogen is quite difficult.
Yes.
So in terms of what people have learned then for early adopters, if you think of hydrogen, perhaps it's a little early in its stage as to what to adopt. Now, we often hear of the big scale arguments or the targets, and we're going green and countries are going green and we're going to have a new port. Very good messaging, starting to get people involved, and they can see the impact on the environment this will have for the future in a positive sense. But when you start coming down more granular level, this becomes a bit more difficult. As it's an emerging market, it's growing and more people are getting involved. You can imagine the amount of knowledge and understanding of adopting technologies is a little limited.
Well, of course, let me interrupt you for a second, and forgive me, I'm going to challenge you a little bit. I remember as a kid growing up in London, one of the first petrol stations changed one of the pumps and put a hydrogen type of device in there. It was very, very early, and they declared this was the future, and it's just the beginning of the technology. But as you can see, I've aged somewhat since then. Do we get to a point where there is just not the take-up needed, and then maybe perhaps technology needs to look in a different direction? Or because we know what we know about hydrogen, do we stick with it and find a way to create the demand that should be there?
Yeah, that's perhaps a good way of putting it. If you're talking about when you were younger and there was hydrogen there, hydrogen use and its adoption has been around for decades. It's not new, but it has been fairly niche. So if you did go to a forecourt petrol station and there was to be a new technology of hydrogen involved, you got to think of the infrastructure, the storage, the creation, the transportation. And if you're the forecourt owner, what are you to invest in?
Right.
So there's always this ambiguity of who's owning this, who's going to drive it. And we're in the position now where governments are sponsoring investments. They are looking to invest in research and feasibility studies and then product development as well. And that's where perhaps there's been a bit stagnated hydrogen. Electrification, electricity is a well-known energy source. We use it in our homes. It's a habit of ours. It's part of our daily lives. So the adoption of bringing people into accepting it does take time. And there's often a bit of a life cycle around that. So what you've had is these companies looking at realizing going green, and there's this natural resource, hydrogen, the most abundant element around us, is a good source of energy, and it's very clean. So you've had companies investing, but the early adopters are perhaps what they're learning is what to adopt in terms of technology, going down to a granular level, and who's invested and who to work with.
All right, thank you for that. Gerhard, let me bring it back to you. You know, if you think about the energy itself is, I guess, the muscle. But what about the brain? Because that's part of the equation, right? Where does digitalization come into all of this?
Yeah, digitalization it's this question is, what do we mean with digitalization? Is it just the unit which transfers, or let's say brings the muscles on the road in digging a hole? So where we say, okay, it's this one thing of activating the muscles, but there are many other aspects on digitalization. It could mean that it gives, for example, a refuse trucks a 360-degree round view to avoid any accident with any just pedestrian walking by, with a lot of warning signals, maybe automatically stop some actions. Or the other thing could be, let's say, optimizing a complete truck fleet. If one truck is blocked in a traffic jam on a motorway, and it will be delayed for, I don't know, 6 hours. So they might change already the routes from other trucks in order maybe to pick up something which is more urgent, or which is top urgent. And it could be already increased to a excavator usage from companies where they say, okay, we need to work for longer because, I don't know, it was stopped, something didn't went in that way what we have expected. So we need to shift around to everything. So it has a lot of aspects how digitalization is affecting the whole mobility of all these vehicles. Doesn't matter if it's on-road or off-road.
Robert, what would you add to the digitalization conversation, and specifically, you know, considerations for organizations who are looking at carbon zero and thinking, what can I use to help me get there?
It's a good time to get involved in digital technologies. Almost you're at the stage where development of fuel cells and its adoption and hydrogen development is like a blank sheet of paper. So you're thinking, what new technologies can I include in the development of my product or bringing it to market? And digital has a role to play there. We're looking at a change of our thoughts on how we adopt these new products to market. So, you know, monitoring, self-conditioning, pre-ordering, storing information, smart cities transferring information from one vehicle to another is improving safety. It's removing human element. It's removing worry. So companies should be looking at what technologies are out there that self-monitor, work along with new envelopes where we can adopt these technologies and move away from perhaps a historic means of vehicle management. It plays a strong role. And yeah, I think it's time for companies to perhaps think a little different and think of the future and adopt these.
Those are important investments to make in the future. But of course, with every decision that an organization makes on their route to carbon zero, there are downsides, there are pitfalls. Let me ask both of you briefly, what should they be on the lookout for when making these big decisions, when shifting things around in their organizations? Gerhard, I'll start with you.
One thing is really make the machines with a smart design. So you need as less as possible of resources. Doesn't matter if it's material, if it's energy. So it should reduce everything. The next thing is really like, from where do you source your material? We know that rare earth magnets, for example, are kind of difficult to produce. And if we are willing to pay a little bit more, let's say globally, let's say in that way, then it becomes much more environmental, let's say, orientated in a better way. So this is the main thing, is really like make a smart design, make an efficient machine, use as less or as little as possible resources to produce it.
Okay, let me challenge you slightly. How do we even know if our design is smart? Everyone tries, I guess, to make a smart design. Any tips on how a design can qualify, in your view, as smart?
It's like we know something, how much energy, for example, does an existing machine use to do something. So we can do monitoring, we can do energy mapping. So which functionality is using which type of energy, and do we have a possibility to recover energy from the movement? Right. A very simple example is a truck down the road. You can restore energy, so you can regenerate, and this has to be one of the targets in thinking of reducing the energy consumption. This means it's not replacing an ICE or a diesel engine one by electric motor, because then everything will stay in the same. And this is what we have learned from the early adopters too, that just replacing the diesel engine with an electric motor and a battery pack doesn't bring you the result what you have expected from the machine. So you need to do more brain work into it.
Great advice. Thank you for that. Robert, any downsides or pitfalls people should watch out for?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question, because we've learned a lot as human beings over the years of engineering challenges that we've had to overcome. And often down the line, we've realized that perhaps there's been an environmental impact later on. We are relying on natural resources, where the approach that everyone's taken is very systematic, careful. It's been around for a long time, but it's the unseen challenges that's the worry. And we don't know what they are directly. What Gerhard is talking about is going out into finite details and doing comparisons between varying technologies. But the impact later on is perhaps it's the one that we have to wait and see.
All right. There's so much uncertainty, apart from the fact we know we need to be making these moves and these changes on our route to carbon zero. It brings me to my final question to both of you, which is, what are your top tips for organizations starting out on their next steps towards carbon zero on this journey? And maybe if you have any ideas on how we also communicate with our local authorities, our government leadership, because I guess they're part of the big equation as well. So top tips for starting out. Robert, I'll start with you.
I think some companies are approached to come up with an engineering solution. I think a tip would be is widen the scope of who you talk to. If you were to look for hydrogen solutions, perhaps online and research, you won't find much. However, there's a lot of expertise out there, and it's terminology that's used that perhaps relates to a different industry. We need to look wider. And when we come up with a solution, not to make it too niche, look at the big scope, where the world is going green, where else can my technology be adopted? And that will bring everyone bringing in carbon zero in quicker and easier. In terms of how do we get involved, the government does have portals where you can log in and actually search by keywords, technologies, projects, and the government is sponsoring and highlighting various projects that are going around that you can register. It's a very useful tool, and the press at the moment is very much gearing up projects, key people involved in those projects, to highlight to people, let's get everyone involved.
All right, thank you for that. Great advice. And Gerhard, finally, top tips that you would share.
Yeah, the one thing is you need to be aware where your machines are used to. So it depending on in which market they are placed. So you might easily research for legislation, and this brings you to something that you need to have electrical machines, and gives you an advice what you have to do, because we already have a lot of experience of this type of stories. And the next thing really like, okay, what is your problem which you want to solve? It's not like giving, as Robert just mentioned, it's not like based on one single component. It's the system approach which you have to take. Bring your machine to the world and to deliver something which is finally you can sell on a very good scale.
Great wisdom. Really interesting to hear both of your perspectives on the route to carbon zero. Robert, Gerhard, thank you both very much indeed.
Yeah,
thanks a lot.
And thank you for watching this Insights talk. We will be back very soon. We look forward to seeing you next time.